Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States owes over $34 trillion. Japan's debt is more than 260% of its GDP, and even the richest nations, from Germany to Canada, are borrowing billions every single year. But here's the question that confuses almost everyone. If every country is in debt, then who does the world actually owe money to? Is there a mysterious global lender? A hidden elite who owns all the world's money? Or is the truth far simpler and far more surprising than most people realize? Let's break down how the world's debt really works and find out who the planet truly owes. On the surface, it sounds impossible. If every country owes trillions, then someone, somewhere, must be collecting that money. But the modern financial system isn't built like a simple borrower-lender relationship. Countries don't just borrow from each other directly. They borrow from markets, from investors, and from themselves. In reality, global debt is a giant web, a network of promises, interest rates, and investments that connects almost every major economy. To understand it, we need to rewind time to when the idea of national debt first began. National debt isn't new. It goes back to the 17th century, when European kingdoms started borrowing money to fight wars. Instead of taxing their citizens immediately, they promised to pay lenders back later, with interest. The idea worked so well that it became a permanent part of government finance. By the 18th century, Britain had created the Bank of England, issuing government bonds that citizens could buy and trade, essentially lending money to their own government. This was the birth of the bond market, and the moment debt became not just a burden, but a tool. Because every bond wasn't just a promise to pay, it was an asset that someone else could invest in. Fast forward to the 20th century. After World War II, the world's economies were shattered and needed rebuilding. In 1944, global leaders gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and designed a new financial order. They created the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, institutions meant to stabilize currencies and provide loans to struggling countries. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, and the system began to revolve around it. When countries needed money, they could issue bonds, and investors, banks, and even other governments would buy them. Debt had gone global. Now, the world wasn't borrowing from a single person. It was borrowing from itself. So who exactly are these creditors? There are three major types. 1. Domestic investors. Most government debt is actually owned by the people of that same country. For example, in the U.S., about 70% of the national debt is held by American institutions, pension funds, corporations, and even the Federal Reserve itself. 2. Foreign governments. Countries often buy each other's bonds. China and Japan, for instance, hold over $2 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds combined. They do this not to own America, but because U.S. bonds are considered safe investments. 3. International institutions. The IMF, World Bank, and private global banks lend money to nations, especially developing ones, to stabilize their economies. These loans come with conditions, interest, and repayment schedules, but they also circulate back into the global financial system. So in the end, most of the world's debt is money we owe to each other. Debt isn't necessarily bad. In fact, it fuels growth. Governments borrow to build roads, fund education, support innovation, and stabilize their economies during crises. The key question isn't, how much debt do we have? It's, can we keep paying the interest? When countries grow, their GDP expands, making old debt easier to manage. But when growth stalls, the interest payments can spiral out of control. That's when crises begin, like the Latin American debt crisis in the 1980s, the European debt crisis in 2010, and the current concerns around U.S. deficit spending. Each time, nations borrow more to recover, and the cycle continues. Today, The world owes over $320 trillion, roughly 3 times the size of the global economy. The United States, China, Japan, and the European Union make up the largest share of this total. But here's the twist. These same countries are also the biggest creditors. Japan, for example, has one of the world's highest debts. Yet it's also one of the largest lenders to other nations. That's because when you buy another country's bonds, you're technically lending to them. So even though governments are in debt, they also hold the debts of others. It's a loop, a system built on trust, trade, and the belief that tomorrow will be more prosperous than today. So who does the world really owe money to? The simple answer, to itself. The money governments borrow doesn't vanish. It circulates through banks, corporations, pensions, and global markets, owned by people, funds, and institutions across the planet. When you buy a government bond, you're not paying off a mystery elite. You're becoming the creditor. The world's debt, in reality, is a reflection of how interconnected we've become. Every dollar owed by one country often ends up as income, investment, or profit. In another, debt is often painted as something terrifying, a shadow looming over the global economy. But in truth, it's also a mirror, showing how modern civilization functions through trust and promise. As long as nations continue to trade, invest, and believe in growth, the world will remain in debt, not because it's broken, but because that's how the financial engine keeps turning. So the next time someone says, "Every country is in debt, the world must be doomed," you'll know the real answer. We owe it to ourselves.